Jane stood before her mirror, holding the delicate veil she would wear on her wedding day. Her reflection beamed back at her, a mixture of nervousness and excitement. In just 3 days, she would walk down the aisle to marry Charles, the love of her life. She twirled slowly, admiring the simple yet elegant gown hanging on the door behind her. "Everything is perfect," she whispered to herself. "Perfect indeed," came Lydia's voice as she entered the room unannounced. Lydia, Jane's best friend since childhood, was carrying a basket of flowers. "But you can't just sit here fussing over wedding details all day, Jane. You need to let loose." Jane smiled at Lydia's lively energy. "I just want everything to go smoothly. There's so much to do, and I don't want anything to go wrong." "Which is exactly why we're going out tonight," Lydia said with a mischievous grin. "A bachelorette party. Just the two of us. Nothing crazy, I promise. Trust me, you'll thank me later." Jane hesitated, biting her lip. "Lydia, I'm not sure. There's still so much to plan." "Jane," Lydia interrupted, putting her hands on her hips. "This is your last chance to have some fun as a single woman. You deserve it. You trust me, don't you?" Jane sighed, her resolve softening. Lydia was always so convincing. "Okay, fine, but just for a little while." The lounge Lydia chose was bustling with energy. Flashing lights, upbeat music, and the hum of chatter filled the space. Lydia led Jane to a private booth near the bar, ordering drinks with ease. "Here's to the bride-to-be," Lydia said, handing Jane a shimmering pink cocktail. Jane laughed, clinking her glass against Lydia's. "To the bride-to-be." The first sip was sweet, refreshing. Jane felt a small wave of relaxation wash over her. "Another one," Lydia said, signaling to the waiter before Jane could protest. "I don't usually drink much," Jane said, but Lydia waved her off. "This is a special night," Lydia said with a wink. "Don't hold back." Jane smiled, trusting her best friend completely. She took another sip, not noticing the subtle way Lydia stirred something into her glass before sliding it back across the table. As the night went on, Jane started to feel strange. Her head felt heavy, her limbs sluggish. She blinked rapidly, trying to focus, but the world around her began to spin. "Lydia," Jane murmured, her voice faint. "I think I need to go home." Lydia's smile never wavered. "Don't worry, I'll take care of everything," she said, guiding Jane toward the exit. The next morning, Jane woke up in an unfamiliar hotel room. Her head throbbed and her mouth was dry. Panic set in as she realized she wasn't at home. She sat up quickly, glancing around the small, dimly lit room. Her dress from the night before was crumpled in a corner. "What happened?" she whispered to herself. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, startling her. She grabbed it and saw Charles's name flashing on the screen. Relief flooded her. She would explain everything to him, and he would help her figure out what had happened. "Charles," she answered, her voice trembling. "Something isn't right. Stop!" Charles interrupted, his tone cold and furious. "Don't lie to me, Jane. I saw the video." Jane froze. "What video?" "The video of you with another man. Someone sent it to me this morning," Charles said, his voice shaking with anger. "How could you do this to me? The wedding is off." "Charles, please, I don't know what you're talking about," Jane cried, but the call ended abruptly. Her phone slipped from her hand as her chest tightened. Tears streamed down her face as she replayed his words. She tried to recall the events of the night before, but everything was a blur. Jane buried her face in her hands, her heart shattered. The wedding she had dreamed of, the life she had planned, was gone. What should have been the happiest day of her life had turned into her worst nightmare. She had no memory of being with another man and felt so confused. Desperation clawed at her, and she decided to go to her best friend to find out what happened that night. Jane stood outside Lydia's apartment, her chest tightening with every breath. Her mind was a storm of confusion and pain. Charles, the man she loved, had abandoned her just a day before their wedding. Charles's furious words echoed in her ears. "The wedding is off!" She clutched her phone, shaking her head in disbelief. How could everything fall apart so suddenly? Her hands trembled as she knocked on Lydia's door. When it opened, Lydia stood there, looking perfectly calm. Her expression shifted to what appeared to be concern as she looked at Jane's tear-streaked face. "Jane, what happened?" Lydia said, stepping aside. Jane marched inside, her voice trembling. "Charles called me this morning. He said he got a video of me with another man. I don't understand what's happening. Lydia, you were with me last night. What happened?" Lydia shut the door behind her, leaning against it with a sly smile. "Oh, Jane. Poor, sweet Jane." Jane blinked, her heart racing. What are you talking about? Lydia walked over to her, crossing her arms. I mean, I made sure Charles saw that video. I wanted him to know the truth about you. Jane's jaw dropped. She staggered back, her hands trembling. The truth? What truth? Lydia, I didn't do anything. I don't even remember what happened last night. Oh, don't play innocent, Lydia said, her voice dripping with malice. You drank too much, got a little too comfortable, and ended up in that hotel room with someone else. That's all Charles needed to see. Jane's confusion deepened. She searched her hazy memories of the previous night, the lounge, the flashing lights, the sweet drinks Lydia kept handing her. Then, nothing. It was all a blur. No, Jane said, shaking her head. That's not true. I didn't. Lydia cut her off, her smile widening. You didn't? Oh, Jane, you have no idea, do you? Let me make it simple for you. I planned it, every single detail. You trusted me, and I used that trust to destroy you. Jane's knees felt weak. She gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. Why? Why would you do this to me? Lydia leaned closer, her eyes gleaming with cruel satisfaction. Because I'm tired of standing in your shadow. Perfect Jane, with her perfect fiancé, her perfect life. Everyone loves you, but nobody sees me. Well, now they will. Tears streamed down Jane's face. Lydia, we've been friends for years. I trusted you with everything. How could you do this? Lydia shrugged, unbothered by Jane's pain. Oh, Jane, don't act so surprised. You must have noticed something. Or were you too busy planning your fairy tale wedding to see what was right in front of you? Jane's chest tightened as she stared at Lydia, confusion and anger warring inside her. What are you talking about? Lydia tilted her head, a sly grin spreading across her face. Charles and we've been seeing each other for months. Jane froze, her breath caught in her throat. What? Lydia laughed, savoring Jane's reaction. He never loved you. He needed someone to make him look respectable, someone everyone would approve of. But me? I'm the one he really wants. I'm the one he loves. Jane's world crumbled, her legs buckled, and she sank into the chair. The man she was supposed to marry, the man she had trusted with her heart, had been lying to her all along. No, Jane whispered, her voice breaking. You're lying. Am I? Lydia said, raising an eyebrow. Go ask him yourself. Oh wait, you can't. He's done with you now, isn't he? Jane's hands balled into fists, her pain giving way to anger. You're disgusting, Lydia, both of you. How could you do this to me? What did I ever do to deserve this? Lydia smirked, unbothered by Jane's fury. You didn't do anything, Jane. That's the point. You just existed, all perfect and untouchable. I wanted to show you that even someone like you can fall. And now, you have. Jane stood abruptly, her tears blurring her vision. You think you've won? You think this makes you better than me? You're wrong. You're nothing but a liar and a cheat. Lydia laughed, her voice cold and sharp. Say what you want, Jane. It doesn't matter. Charles and I are together now, and you're alone. Jane couldn't take another second in the same room as Lydia. She turned and ran out the door, Lydia's laughter following her like a haunting melody. Outside, the cool breeze hit Jane's face, but it did nothing to calm the storm raging inside her. She stumbled to a nearby bench, clutching her head as tears streamed down her face. Her memories of that night were still a blur, but the betrayal was painfully clear. The people she trusted most, her best friend and her fiancé, had conspired against her. They had stolen her happiness, her future, and her trust. But as the night deepened, Jane's sobs quieted. A new feeling began to rise within her. It wasn't just anger, it was determination. She didn't know how, but she would rebuild her life. Lydia and Charles wouldn't win. Jane wiped her tears and stood. Her heart was broken, but it was still beating. And as long as it was, she wouldn't let them destroy her. With her reputation in ruins and whispers of scandal following her wherever she went, she decided to leave the city. She packed her belongings, left her wedding gown hanging in her old closet, and decided to move to her Aunt Mary's house in a quiet town far away. Jane arrived at Aunt Mary's home with a single suitcase and a heart heavy with pain. The house, small but warm, was surrounded by colorful flowers that danced in the gentle breeze. Aunt Mary, with her kind eyes and welcoming smile, pulled Jane into a tight hug as soon as she stepped out of the taxi. You're safe now, my dear, Mary said softly, rubbing Jane's back. Come inside and rest. Jane nodded, too exhausted to speak, The last few weeks had been a blur of whispers, judgmental stares, and overwhelming shame. She hadn't just lost her fiancé and best friend, she had lost her sense of self. Days turned into weeks, and Jane rarely left her room. She spent most of her time staring at the ceiling, replaying the events that had brought her here. Aunt Mary tried her best to cheer her up, bringing her warm meals and sitting with her in silence. One morning, Mary walked into the room with a broom in hand. "Jane, this isn't like you," she said gently but firmly. "You've always been strong. You can't let those people take your spirit away." Jane sighed. "I just feel lost, Aunt Mary. I don't know where to begin." "Begin with small steps," Mary said, offering her a small smile. "Come to the garden with me today. The sun will do you good." Reluctantly, Jane followed her outside. The garden was alive with colors: red hibiscus flowers, yellow marigolds, and lush green bushes. For the first time in weeks, Jane felt a sliver of peace. But peace was short-lived. One morning, Jane woke up feeling nauseous. She barely made it to the bathroom before throwing up. At first, she thought it was the stress, but the sickness persisted for days. "You're going to see the doctor," Aunt Mary insisted, her voice leaving no room for argument. At the clinic, Jane sat nervously as the doctor returned with her test results. "Congratulations, Miss Jane," the doctor said with a kind smile. "You're pregnant." Jane's heart sank. Her hands trembled as she clutched the sides of her chair. "Pregnant?" she whispered. The doctor nodded. "You'll need to take care of yourself and come in for regular checkups. Let us know if you have any concerns." Jane walked home in silence, her mind racing. When they reached the house, she finally broke down in tears. "Aunt Mary," she said, her voice shaking, "I'm pregnant. How am I supposed to raise a child on my own? I don't even know the father of the baby. What kind of life can I give them?" Mary wrapped her arms around her. "It's natural to feel scared, Jane. But this child isn't a punishment. It's a new beginning. You're stronger than you think. You'll figure it out, one step at a time." Jane spent the next few days alone, grappling with her emotions. She was angry, scared, and overwhelmed. But when she placed her hand on her stomach, a strange feeling of calm washed over her. This baby didn't choose to be born into this mess, she thought. But they're here now. I won't let them suffer because of what happened. Determined to rebuild her life, Jane started looking for work. After a few weeks of searching, she found a job as an administrative assistant at a local office. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and it gave her a sense of purpose. Every evening after work, Jane would sit at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and her old sketchbook. She had loved designing clothes as a teenager, but had given it up when life got busy. Now, with her evenings free, she began sketching again. One night, Aunt Mary walked in and saw her drawings. "These are beautiful, Jane," she said, holding up a sketch of a flowing blue dress. "You've got talent." Jane smiled for the first time in days. "It feels good to create again," she admitted. Mary nodded. "You should hold on to this passion. It might just lead you somewhere wonderful." Months passed, and Jane grew stronger with each day. She worked tirelessly, finding solace in the routine and the knowledge that she was building a future for her baby. When her son Ethan was born, Jane held him close, tears streaming down her face. "I promise to give you the best life I can," she whispered. Ethan's arrival marked a turning point for Jane. She was no longer the broken woman who had fled the city. She was a mother, an artist, and a fighter. Her journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, Jane felt hope. She would rise from the ashes of her past and create a future filled with love and possibility for herself and her son. Jane stood at the kitchen sink, watching Ethan play in the small garden outside. His laughter filled the air as he ran after a butterfly, his tiny hands waving with excitement. Despite the whispers of judgment from neighbors and the occasional cold stares from colleagues, Ethan was Jane's light. "She's raising that boy all alone," one neighbor had once whispered, loud enough for Jane to hear. "No husband, no respect. What kind of example is that?" Another coworker had smirked during a lunch break. Jane's great at her job, but let's be honest, her past isn't exactly spotless. Jane heard it all, but she refused to let it break her. Instead, she poured her energy into being the best mother she could be. Ethan, now 5 years old, was bright and curious, asking endless questions about everything. "Mommy, why do flowers smell nice?" Ethan asked one day, his hands holding a daisy. Jane smiled, kneeling to his level. "Because they want to make people happy, just like you." Ethan giggled, throwing his arms around her. "You make me happy, Mommy." While Jane worked as an administrative assistant during the day, Her evenings were spent designing clothes at the small desk in her living room. Her sketches had grown more intricate, her confidence stronger. One day, Jane attended a business networking event hosted by her firm. It was a formal gathering filled with industry leaders and ambitious professionals. Jane had hesitated to come, but eventually decided it could be a chance to meet new people and showcase her growing fashion brand. As she sipped her drink, she was introduced to a tall, confident man with a warm smile. "Jane, this is Mike Mensa, the CEO of Apex Dynamics," her colleague said. Jane's heart skipped a beat. Apex Dynamics was one of the leading tech companies in the region. Mike's reputation as a sharp, visionary leader preceded him. "Nice to meet you too," Jane replied, shaking his hand nervously. "I've heard about your designs," Mike said, his tone genuinely interested. "You have real talent." Jane blinked, surprised. "You've seen my work?" "I have," Mike said with a smile, "and I think you're holding back. Your designs are incredible, but they deserve a bigger platform." Jane looked down, her cheeks warming. "I'm just trying to figure things out. It's been a slow start." Mike nodded thoughtfully. "Starting small is fine, but don't let fear hold you back. You've got something special, Jane. If you ever want advice or support, I'd be happy to help." Over the next few weeks, Mike became a steady presence in Jane's life. He wasn't just a mentor, he became a friend to both her and Ethan. "Mommy, is Mr. Mike coming over today?" Ethan asked one evening as he played with his toys. "Yes, he is," Jane replied, smiling. When Mike arrived, Ethan ran to the door. "Mr. Mike, look, I made a tower." Mike knelt down, admiring Ethan's block creation. "That's amazing, buddy. You're going to be an engineer someday." Ethan laughed, clearly delighted. Jane watched the scene, her heart swelling. Mike's kindness toward Ethan made her feel a warmth she hadn't felt in years. As Jane and Mike worked on expanding her fashion brand, their connection deepened. He helped her secure better suppliers, introduced her to key industry contacts, and even arranged for one of her collections to be featured at a local fashion show. "You're doing amazing, Jane," Mike said one evening as they reviewed her latest designs. "Thanks to you," Jane replied, her voice soft. "No," Mike said firmly, meeting her eyes. "You've done this yourself. I just gave you a little push." Their gazes lingered, and for a moment, Jane felt a spark she hadn't felt in years. But she quickly looked away, her smile fading. "Jane," Mike said gently, sensing her hesitation, "you don't have to be afraid of feeling again." She shook her head. "It's not that simple, Mike. My past, it's hard to let go of." Mike nodded, understanding. "I'm not asking you to rush into anything. I'll wait. You and Ethan mean a lot to me, and I'm not going anywhere." Jane's chest tightened. She wasn't ready to admit her feelings, but she couldn't deny the comfort and stability Mike brought into her life. One afternoon, while sorting through her mail, Jane froze when she saw a white envelope with elegant gold lettering. She opened it carefully, her heart pounding. Inside was an invitation to Lydia and Charles's engagement party. Jane stared at the names, her stomach churning. Memories of betrayal and heartbreak rushed back, making her hands tremble. When Mike stopped by later that evening, he noticed the envelope on the table. "What's this?" he asked, picking it up. Jane sighed. "An invitation, Lydia and Charles's engagement party." Mike frowned. "They're trying to humiliate you." "I know," Jane said quietly. "They think I'm still broken, that I'll fall apart just seeing them again." "Are you going to go?" Mike asked, watching her closely. Jane hesitated. "I don't know if I can face them." Mike placed a hand on her shoulder. "Jane, you've come so far. You've built a life for yourself and Ethan. You're not the woman they betrayed anymore. Show them that." Jane looked at him, her resolve hardening. "You're right. If they want me there, I'll go. But I won't be the victim they're expecting." In the days leading up to the party, Jane worked tirelessly to design a dress that would make a statement. She chose bold red fabric, a color that symbolized strength and resilience. Ethan watched her as she sewed late into the night. "Mommy, why are you making a princess dress?" he asked. Jane smiled at him. "Because Mommy's going to show some people that she's not afraid of them anymore." "Be brave, Mommy," Ethan said, hugging her tightly. "I will, sweetheart," she whispered, feeling a surge of determination. On the night of the party, Jane stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her earrings. The red gown fit her perfectly, and her reflection showed a confident, unshakable woman. "You look amazing," Mike said when he arrived to drive her to the venue. "Thanks," Jane replied, taking a deep breath. "Let's do this." The grand ballroom shimmered with golden lights, and the hum of polite conversation filled the air. Wealthy guests dressed in glamorous outfits sipped champagne and exchanged pleasantries. In the center of the room stood Lydia and Charles, basking in the attention as they greeted their well-dressed friends. Jane arrived at the entrance, her heart pounding, but her head held high. She wore the red gown she had designed, a bold statement of her resilience and strength. As she stepped inside, heads turned, conversations paused, and whispers spread like wildfire. "Is that Jane?" one woman muttered to her companion. "She looks stunning," another said, unable to hide her surprise. Jane ignored the murmurs, focusing on the two people who had once shattered her life. Lydia caught sight of her and smirked, nudging Charles. Together, they made their way to Jane. "Jane," Lydia said with mock sweetness, her eyes scanning Jane's dress. "What a surprise to see you here. I didn't think you'd dare show up." Jane returned Lydia's smile, her voice steady. "Well, Lydia, you did invite me. It would have been rude not to come." Charles crossed his arms, his gaze sharp. "Still working that boring office job?" Jane smirked, tilting her head slightly. "Actually, I run my own fashion brand now. Business is booming. You may have seen one of my collections featured in Style Central last month." Lydia's confident smile faltered for a brief moment before she regained her composure. "Well, isn't that impressive?" she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Jane stepped closer, her eyes locked on Lydia's. "Impressive indeed. In fact, tonight is the perfect opportunity to celebrate not just your engagement, but also to share some truths with everyone here." The crowd around them grew quiet, sensing tension. Lydia's smile stiffened as she laughed nervously. "Jane, don't be ridiculous. This is a happy occasion." Jane's voice rose, carrying across the room. "Oh, I agree. It's a perfect occasion for the truth to come out." She turned to the guests, her voice clear and firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to congratulate Lydia and Charles, but I think it's only fair that you all know the real story behind their perfect facade." Gasps rippled through the crowd as all eyes turned to Jane. Lydia's face drained of color, and Charles's jaw tightened. "What are you doing?" Charles hissed, stepping toward her. "Something I should have done years ago," Jane replied coldly. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folder of documents. "Let's start with you, Lydia. While you've been planning this grand wedding, you've also been keeping busy with a string of affairs, wealthy men from all walks of life. Shall I name a few?" Lydia's mouth opened, but no words came out. The room erupted in shocked whispers. "Lies!" Lydia finally shouted, her voice cracking. "You have no proof!" Jane held up photos and text messages she had uncovered through careful investigation. "Oh, I have proof, Lydia. Should I pass these around?" Lydia froze, her face pale. Jane turned to Charles, her gaze piercing. "And as for you, Charles, I wonder if your employers know about the funds you've been quietly embezzling. How much was it? Thousands? Millions?" Charles's face turned bright red. "You don't know what you're talking about," he snapped. "Oh, but I do," Jane said, holding up a printout of financial records. "You were careless, Charles. The evidence is all here, and I've made sure the right people will see it." The room erupted into chaos. Guests whispered furiously, some pulling out their phones to discreetly capture the drama. "You planned this," Lydia snarled, her voice shaking with rage. Jane smiled faintly. "No, Lydia, you planned this. You planned to humiliate me, to make me look small. But tonight, I'm showing everyone who you really are." Charles tried to step forward, but Mike, who had been quietly observing from a corner, intercepted him. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Mike said calmly, his presence commanding. Charles glared at him, but the fight had drained from his posture. Lydia, meanwhile, was left speechless, her carefully curated image crumbling before everyone's eyes. Jane turned to the crowd one last time. "I've rebuilt my life from the ground up, despite the betrayals and lies. But I refuse to let these two continue to hurt others. Thank you all for your time." With that, Jane turned on her heel, walking out of the ballroom with her head held high. Mike followed, his proud smile lighting up his face. In the car ride home, Jane let out a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. "You were amazing," Mike said, reaching for her hand. "I feel like a weight has been lifted," Jane admitted, a small smile forming. "I'm finally free of them." Mike squeezed her hand gently. "You've always been strong, Jane. Tonight, you proved it to the world." Jane looked out the window, her heart lighter than it had been in years. She had faced her past, and she had won. Now, she was ready to embrace the future. The days following the party were a whirlwind. The scandal spread quickly with Lydia and Charles facing public disgrace. Lydia's affairs became the talk of the town, and Charles's company launched an investigation into his embezzlement. He was fired in disgrace and also had to face legal charges. Their engagement crumbled under the weight of their lies. Meanwhile, Jane's life blossomed. Her fashion brand gained more recognition, and orders poured in from new clients. She focused on her work and on raising Ethan, whose laughter continued to fill her days with joy. "Mommy, can we go to the park today?" Ethan asked one sunny afternoon. "Of course, sweetheart," Jane said, scooping him up. "Let's go make some memories." A few weeks later, Mike invited Jane and Ethan to a picnic at a quiet lakeside park. The setting was serene, with tall trees swaying gently in the breeze, and the sun casting golden reflections on the water. Ethan ran ahead, chasing a butterfly, while Jane and Mike spread out a blanket on the grass. "This is nice," Jane said, glancing around. "I needed this." Mike nodded. "You've been working so hard, Jane. You deserve a break." They sat together, watching Ethan play in the distance. After a while, Mike turned to Jane, his expression serious but warm. "There's something I've been meaning to say," he began. Jane's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" Mike took a deep breath. "I've watched you grow into this incredible woman over the past few months. You're strong, talented, and an amazing mother. I admire you more than I can say." Jane's cheeks flushed, and she looked away, unsure of what to say. Mike reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Jane's breath caught as he opened it, revealing a simple but elegant diamond ring. "Jane, I want to spend the rest of my life with you," Mike said, his voice steady and full of emotion. "I want to be there for you and Ethan, through the good and the bad. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Jane's eyes as she stared at the ring, her heart overwhelmed with emotion. "Mike," she began, her voice trembling, "you've been so patient with me. I was so scared to feel again, to let someone in after everything I went through, but you've shown me what love really is." She smiled through her tears. "Yes, Mike, I'll marry you." Ethan came running back just as Mike slipped the ring onto Jane's finger. "What's happening?" he asked, looking between them. "Mr. Mike just asked me to marry him," Jane said, scooping Ethan into her arms. "And she said yes," Mike added, grinning. Ethan clapped his hands excitedly. "Yay! Does that mean Mr. Mike will be my dad now?" Jane and Mike exchanged a warm glance. "It means we'll all be a family," Jane said, kissing Ethan's cheek. The weeks leading up to their wedding were filled with laughter and excitement. Jane kept the ceremony small and intimate, inviting only close friends and family. On the day of the wedding, as she stood at the altar with Mike and Ethan by her side, she felt a peace she hadn't known in years. "You've given me a second chance at happiness," Jane whispered to Mike as they exchanged vows. "You gave that to yourself," Mike replied, his eyes shining with love. Lydia and Charles, meanwhile, faded into obscurity. Their actions had caught up with them, leaving them to face the consequences of their choices. Jane's story became a testament to resilience, truth, and the power of starting over. She had reclaimed her dignity, found love, and built a life filled with hope and happiness. Thanks for watching, dear viewers. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and consider subscribing to the channel. I'll see you in our next video.